All right, everybody. It is 2:03. Welcome to the folks who are here. Thank you so much for joining us. I am going to share my screen and we will jump right into it. So let's click a couple buttons here and voila, there we go. Hopefully everybody can see my screen, this very bright yellow PowerPoint deck. So as we get going, we're going to do a deep dive into the Beehive product today. There's going to be a bit of a training for those of you on here who are existing customers. You can just kind of look around and and see what's going on if you're out there in the world. So this is a bit of what we're going to go over today. So I'll just explain quickly who we are. We'll talk about the product roadmap and vision for these five different modules here: physical risk, transition risk, governance, the reporting module, and policy. I've got the chat open, which let's make sure everybody, there you go, everyone can chat now. And I've got the Q&A open. So you're welcome to chime in on either one of those places and ask whatever questions you got. So let's open up the Q&A. All right, beautiful. Let's get into it. So who are we? I forgot to open this up, but we are Beehive. We're a climate risk management software who helps our clients comply with regulations like California's SB 261 and do everything that they need to do to publish what you might know as a TCFD or a IFRS S2 report, basically to report on climate-related financial risk. My name is Adriel. I'm the founder and CEO of Beehive. I've been in corporate sustainability for quite a few years and published a book about called Attainable Sustainability. So you can all check that out. So let's get into the roadmap and everything we're doing. First, we're going to talk about physical risk. So one of the things that you need to do for your climate-related risk assessment is assess your financial exposure to natural disasters today and in the future across multiple climate scenarios. So the problem with how that was traditionally done is that, especially using a consultant, it's not particularly data driven and it's fairly limited in scope. I'll tell you what I mean. So when I was first researching this business almost a year and a half ago, I talked to a publicly traded company that y'all interact with at least every week, and they told me that they used a Big Four accounting firm for their climate risk work. And I said, "How interesting! How did that firm do physical risk assessments?" What they told me was that that firm created a survey that they sent out to the office managers of this company's offices. And they said, "Hey, Johnny in Los Angeles or Sally in Paris, what do you think is the impact of wildfires in your region today and in 30 years?" And poor Johnny and Sally had to like fill out this form. And I don't know, like maybe bad. I don't know. I got stuff going on. Like, what are heat waves? What are floods? What are wildfires? They're very not data driven. So what Beehive allows you to do is to get an auditable risk assessment in seconds. And I'll show you a little bit what that means before we get back to the roadmap and the vision. So this is the Beehive software. What you're able to do is input thousands of assets all over the world. You can input offices, but you can go deeper because offices are only a small part of what you have going on. You can look at your data centers, you can look at thousands of employees, and you can do this automatically and say, I want to see all of my assets, we call them my employees, my data centers, my offices. You can want to see, let me see them in Europe. Let me see how flood risks are going to change if I want to see a risk map in the long term under the worst scenarios of climate change, for example. So everything that I just did here in a few seconds, which is show me thousands of assets and locations all over the world with an audit trail, and this is really important. So any one of these assets, if you want to say, well, why is flood risk what it is? Well, here's the audit trail, meaning we think flood risk is a 5 out of 7 risk in the short term because over the past 30 years, there have been this many floods and this has been the building value loss, and we're expecting it to rise over time. So like that's what it looks like. If you want to see this in a map, or I think we were somewhere in Paris, this is a flood risk map in Paris. Looks like this office building is right on top of the river, which makes a bit of sense. So that's one way that you can really like use this very quickly. So where normally this physical risk assessment would take many, many months of research, you would not get like an auditable report that you can really trust. And you would really only look at a couple of offices because it just takes so much time to research the wildfire and flood risk or whatever else in any geography here. All that happens immediately with an audit trail, and you got a lot of value here. You can now, just for the folks who are customers here, you might want to show what I just showed you um, on the map is a really useful way to see this. But you can go deeper. So you could also click on this assets table and filter this in a bunch of different ways. So if you want like show me all my offices, let's expand this to 50 locations, but I just want to focus on the ones who have high, risk in these categories. Actually, data centers would be great here. Let's take a look at my data centers who have high wildfire heat risk, but I only want to see the ones who have like high or medium risk. And show me just the ones in the US or whatever, and let's add employees. Like you can do this all really quickly. And if you want to go even deeper, you can export this here, which most folks do. It just exports as an Excel file. And then you can play around, create a lot of charts and graphs. And we often do this for our customers. So once we present this data that's all been uploaded, we might show you a few visualizations to understand like what these risks are. So you can really break them down for your team and your colleagues. So that's a bit about physical risk. So hopefully it makes it like really easy for you to get a really high credibility report or physical risk assessment done in a few seconds. And then what gets really cool is that different people in your organization might use this in different ways. So you might go to your engineering department. Actually, let's go back here. You might go to your engineering department and say, hey, I want to show you the data centers around the world and show you that these have high heat wave risk. Looks like these have some wildfire risk. Like, are you aware of this? Do we have a plan to handle what happens if a heat wave causes huge outages like it did in Texas recently for data centers? Do you have a plan of what happens if a wildfire cuts power? Should we dig into that a little bit? So that's what your engineering team wants to know. Your HR team is very focused on employees. So they might say, show me all the employees who I don't care what the risk is, but let's focus on the US where our headquarters are. And I just want to see the highest risk employees. And you can dig into that. You can say how many, I guess here I have my little demo account, just have one employee per zip code. We can see how many employees you have in your zip code. You can mark some of them as critical employees, which is maybe your executives. So maybe you find out, oh my gosh, like of my 10-person executive team, 7 of them live in high risk areas. Do we have an evacuation plan or business continuity plan if somebody's living where the LA fires happened and there's some terrible disaster? I'm sure everyone's got reactions here. There's some terrible, wildfire disaster over here. Do we have a plan for that? Or what if we've got executives or board members, enjoying their winter in Florida or their fall in Florida, and some crazy hurricane comes off the coast? Do we have a plan to evacuate them? So those are some ways that you can really dig into this really well. So, what's coming a bit? Let's talk about roadmap. Let's talk about vision. So, over the next few weeks, so today we have the US, most of Europe, and India. What we don't have of Europe right now is Northern Europe and the Baltics and some of Eastern Europe. So, by the end of next week or early the week after, you're going to see like Ukraine, Belarus, the Nordics, and this little circle here down to Poland included. And we're going to get to as part of Europe eventually in the future. We are beginning to build out the Middle East. Many of our customers have offices, especially in Israel, but also in Egypt, Saudi, and the UAE. So we're building out risk maps for this area here. We'll include Oman and Yemen, and over in Egypt. And then we're going to make our way to Asia and Australia over the course of like late May, early June. That's the geographic expansion. And then before we touch on South America and Canada and Mexico. And from a risk perspective, we have wildfire risks, flood risks, and heat wave risks today. In July or so, you're going to see sea level rise, water stress, or drought risk, which is really important for data centers. And you'll see hurricanes as well. So that's a bit of what's coming. And then you think about the vision. This is useful to an extent. This information is useful for planning so that again you can go, hey, show me where heat waves are going to be in the United States and who are my people or data centers, or you can do some planning around this. What would be particularly valuable is if you know where disasters are happening right now and who are being impacted. So if we tell you that theoretically this is what a wildfire map looks like in the United States, but we can tell you practically there's a wildfire developing right now that is expected to be in this specific region. Yeah, not over here, but it's going to be in this region. And these are your employees impacted by this. Then you can really do like good disaster response based off this information. If you know that, let's take a look at where our data centers here. If any have high flood risk, maybe over in Florida. Let's see what I've set up. These guys, whatever. Let's take a look at flood risk. Let's see if these guys have flood risk here. Yeah, a little bit. If you say, hey, like, theoretically, we did some planning and flood risk might be high for this data center here. But if we tell you there's a hurricane happening right now that might impact this data center, then all of a sudden your engineering team can respond and make sure the data is extracted, things are protected, and things are safe. So that's a bit of what's happening on physical risk. Happy to go into any more of that that could be useful. And again, feel free to chime in with questions in the webinar chat or the Q&A throughout. All right, let's talk about transition risks. So the next thing you have to do for this TCFD IFRS report, if you're complying with something like 261 in California, is transition risks. And basically, transition risks and opportunities, there's like 4 risk categories: market, reputation, technological risk, and um, one more that I am forgetting off the slow button top of my head, and policy and legal risks. And there's 5 opportunity categories, and then you got to divide the physical risks into acute and chronic, and like really not just like wildfires are bad, but say like here's what they might do for us. The way this normally works with a consultant is they would go and interview a bunch of your executives, and you'd set up all these meetings with your head of marketing and your VP of engineering and your VP of HR, and you go to them and you say, "Hey, how do you think climate change is going to impact our HR program?" And this HR leader, who never really thought much about this, this isn't his or her job, is going to be like, I don't know. I mean, like, I guess it'll be a problem. Like, I hope our employees, I don't know. I hope our employees are safe. And maybe there'll be places, we have an office in India. Like, I heard floods are bad in India. Maybe it'll be hard to hire in India. That's kind of how that goes. And it takes many months to schedule and a lot of executive time. So that's the problem of how it exists today. Now, what our product allows you to do today is we have this big database of risks and opportunities that you can filter by category, that you can understand a little bit better, and that you can really easily mark, and that we mark for you to say, hey, here's the ones that are relevant for you. And for any one of these, we mark what time horizon it's likely to go under, what the impact will be, what the likelihood of this issue will be. So that's how it works today is we mark these manually and we just do that for you. So instead of you going to your executive and saying, what do you think this might do for us? You can bring this to your executive, to your head of HR or your head of marketing and say, hey, I've identified a risk that there's changing customers on expectations, changing customers expectations on sustainability. And I think this risk might have some sort of like, whatever, let's make up a high impact over the meeting. Like, what are we doing about this? Do we have a plan here? So you still get that executive engagement, which is really important. You're not trying to, like, the whole point of this is to get executives thinking about climate. You're not avoiding that. You're just bringing the conversation instead of like asking them questions about which they've never considered and have no expertise. You're bringing them problems around which they can get into problem solving mode, and you can work on that together. So that's what exists today. What's coming fairly soon is for any one of these risks, you'll be able to actually see how peers of yours have responded in similar ways. So if we say that, let's go back to our one here, changing customer expectations on sustainability might be a risk for you, you'll be able to see, well, here's what Atlassian said, and here's what Microsoft said, and here's what whatever company is like here's what McDonald's said if you're a restaurant business. And you'll be able to see how your peers have said similar things so that you can then do a little bit of this peer analysis and say, well, like my peers aren't saying it, maybe it's not that big of a deal for us. So that's what's coming over the next month or so. That should be live by the end of May. And then where this is really going to go, the vision here is 2 things. One is that it's maybe a little more vision. Oh, this will come in like June. But AI should do all this for you. So, if you're a customer on here, you know that you've told us a lot about your business. We've got information in here like your 10K and your ESG report. We know the geography in which you do business. We know who was on your board. Like we have all this information already. So AI should take the role of the consultant or even us right now, and mark those risks for you and then give you explanations. Like we think that this is a risk because this is what we read in your 10K, and these are the impacts that your peers have mentioned. So that's a bit of what's coming. Um, and then the vision is that each of these risks you identify eventually will have modules to actually help you manage those risks. So I see Asheen asked a question here. Do you have any plans to crowdsource or aggregate some suggested responses to mitigate or adapt common risks? For example, we have a data center in a floodplain. Here are three things companies typically do in response. Yeah, it's a really good question. Um, if you think about like climate risk management and like what we think of as our job, there's measuring risk, there's managing risk, and there's reporting on risk. Today, what we're doing is the first and the third. We help you measure risk, and then we help you report on it. And that's fine. It's pretty good. But that's almost like if you're a carbon accounting provider, it's probably actually similar to what your carbon accounting provider does, which, oh, we help you measure emissions and we'll help you like report it to legislative bodies or to investors or to your executives. But how you reduce emissions, well, maybe we sell you offsets, but it takes some time to build that out. But I think that's also the most important part, right? If I tell you, in your example here, Sheen, a data center in a floodplain, you're like, ah, all right, what do I do? Never dealt with that before. That's not good enough. So I think what we really need to build out is like, how do you actually respond to these physical risks? And I'll show you in a bit how we're helping you manage um, a response to a transition risk. I'll show you that in a few minutes here. And I'll talk a little bit about, well, actually, let's talk about that now. So part of the vision around physical risks is to say, hey, we've identified, and this is maybe a later this year, early next year solution. But hey, we've identified employees. Here's the ones who have high risk of wildfires. Here's the ones who have high risk from floods, high risk from heat waves, whatever. We've identified them all. Um, what am I going to do about them? Some of the things we want to build are training modules. So you can automatically send out, hey, for all y'all who live in high risk and the long term from heat waves, here's what you should do about that. For everyone who lives in high flood regions, here's what you should know about keeping yourself safe. For everyone who lives in wildfire regions, here's what you should know. So like some of those trainings I think will be really, really valuable and just make it easy for you to like keep people safe. And there's a few other products around that are still like a little early, so I don't want to overcommit here, but building out the right way, like measuring is great, reporting is important. That's what you got to do to follow the law. So like we got to help you do that really well. Um, but then the real value is like, all right, like, what do I do? And so we need to get into that probably late this year, early next year. Good question. All right. Thank you for the question. Keep them coming. All right, we did transition risk. Let's talk about governance. Governance is pretty quick. So you have to set up governance for this rule. This is really important. Specifically, just like what the output needs to look like is if you go to the report, leave this for a second. There's two questions about governance in your TCFD or IFRS output. The first is what is your board's oversight of these risks, and the second, what is management's oversight of these risks? And so what you're able to do today, or but the problem is like setting this up for the first time is confusing. You might not have done this before, and how can we help? So what the product allows you to do today is that you input your board of directors, you input your members of your ESG steering committee. You can mark who's on which board. You can then go deeper and say, here's who has climate risk expertise, and here who does not have climate risk expertise. And all this is important because it helps you answer that question. You can mark like when your next meetings are, and I'll share why in a second. And then all of that gets translated into your IFRS report, which I'll also show you in a minute. So that's what you can do today. You set up all your governance. If you don't have an ESG steering committee and you want like guidance and advice, we'll give you guidance and advice, and based on like who we see on these boards the most, and we have a lot of content around this, and we'll help you out with that. But like if you're a company who's doing this, you're probably, if not publicly traded and very large, you have a good board of directors, like you just need to kind of include some of this stuff in the charter. And so we can make a lot of those recommendations. What the vision of this is you need to put into your report how often these teams meet to review climate risk. And usually for your boards, you'll get semi-annual or annual meetings. And for your ESG steering committee, you'll have monthly or quarterly meetings. Now, anyone on this call who's on like an ESG steering committee or sustainability committee or whatever at their companies knows that like putting together content and information for these presentations is super time consuming. You start a couple weeks before, you gather stuff, you try to make it look pretty, you get conversation topics. If we know that like here's when your next meeting is for this group and for this group, we can tell you a couple weeks before, hey, here's relevant information about your risks and how they've evolved over the next last month or what's coming over the next quarter that you can include in this report. So as we bring in some of that live physical risk data that I talked about, as we are able to like better assess, and I'll talk about regulatory issues in a moment, and we can assess that, then we should be able to use AI and software to actually help you draft some of those communications that you might want to share with your board or with your ESG steering committee. So that's a bit of the vision around this feature. Just to help out with that. All right. Let's talk about reporting. So to follow a law like SB 261, you need to publish this thing called it's called TCFD aligned, but the new term is IFRS S2 report. And it takes a lot of time and expertise. If you hire consultants and you pay them however much you want to pay them, um, it just takes some time. It's a long report. They got to do a lot of research. They got to gather all this information. You're not going to get a draft back for months. And whenever you do get a draft back, of course, you'll want to make edits. You can also write it yourself. It's not rocket science. Just takes a lot of time, and you're all very busy people. So the product does for you today is write this report for you using AI. So we take all the governance being a good example here. We take all this information that we have from your board charters, from what you set up in government in the governance tab here, and AI actually drafts your answer for you. And this does works for every single question. So you can, great, we drafted this question. Let's go to this longer question here. You see the transition risks and opportunities got pulled in because that's relevant for this question. Use a bunch of information to draft this, and here's what it did for you. Um, this is great. This is just the first draft, and it's not meant to be perfect. Like it's not. It's AI. It's not a very good writer for any of you who's used AI before. But what it does is it gives you immediately a way to review this draft and say, oh, like, all right, give me something to respond to. Oh, I don't like that. It says here's pull this out of the Beehive software. So I looked at offices, employees, and data centers, in these countries. I guess that's where I loaded in my little demo can here. You're like, I don't like this section. I'm going to delete it, or I got to type this a little differently based on what I know, or fix this all up. You can do that immediately. So that's helpful. You're like, you're gonna always edit what a consultant sends you or go to multiple reviews, but here just you do it immediately instead of waiting 2 months. The other big value here is that you can upload peers. So any of our clients tells us who they benchmark against. If any of those people have ever published a climate risk report of any sort, we pull that information into here. So if you want to compare yourself to Workday or to Zendesk or whatever, you can just go through here and say, how did Zendesk answer this question? How did Zendesk answer this question? How did Zendesk answer this question or this question or this question? And so then you can say, all right, this is how I answered it. This is how Zendesk answered it. Wow, Zendesk is a lot longer. Should I be concerned about this? Well, what about Take Two, another company I compare myself to? Well, they took this approach, like which one do I want to take? So this benchmarking that normally you'd open up 30 tabs for and Google all your peers and search for their reports, it's just built in here. And if you're like, oh, I love how whatever, I don't know, HubSpot answered theirs, I love this answer. Click here, you can see their full disclosure. And so you can be like, all right, let me get the context around how they did this, and here's what I can learn from. Oh, I don't like HubSpot. Let me show me Workday. Here's Workday's disclosure. So that's really helpful. So that's what the product does today. And, you can view all this and whatever, edit it to your heart's content. That's what the product does today. Our like pitch to new customers is basically we're almost there, not quite, but almost there. Anyone who uses Beehive, instead of taking 6 months as you normally would with a consultant, you get your draft report by the end of the kickoff call because we've already uploaded your offices to do physical risk. You've already exchanged those with the employee and data center information. AI already did the risk assessment. AI already wrote the draft of your report. It's not done. You need to edit it, improve it, fix it. It'll make some mistakes, but it's pretty good. What's coming over the next month is what we're calling like version control or draft management. So basically, right now, if I come in here and AI writes this, and then your Beehive customer success manager is like, I don't like this sentence. That's bad. I want to change it to this. Great. Now that did that, and then you, the director of ESG, goes and like changes this again and changes it to this, and then your boss sees this. The VP of legal sees this. They don't actually know who wrote this. So if they like something or don't like something, they're not sure if there should be like blaming our bad AI or an incompetent Beehive customer success person, or if it was Joey, the head of ESG, who wrote this. Oh well, let me double check. Like, let me understand why Joey wrote this so I can, like, before I just cancel it, maybe Joey had a good reason. So that like version control to see who did what is going to be in here. I think it'll be really, really helpful. So that's what's coming, and a bit of the vision here is to do this for other reports. You could assume things like CDP has a big climate risk section, and there's some other work we'd like to do there. So that's what we've got on reporting. All right, our last little section here is regulatory risk. So, earlier Sheen asked the question, are there any plans to help manage risks here instead of just measuring them or reporting on them? So if you read any TCFD report, you are almost always going to see a risk that looks a little bit like this, that inconsistent climate policies across jurisdictions are going to increase our regulatory complexity and compliance burdens. Yeah, every report has this because it's a real risk. There's thousands of environmental and climate regulations all over the world. New ones come and go every week. And so it's just hard to keep track of. And what many companies have is they read a bunch of newsletters, hear about this stuff at conferences, track all these laws in a spreadsheet, call their lawyer or consultant for $1,000 an hour to like ask some questions. They put that all into a spreadsheet. That is super time consuming. That creates missed laws. You might not understand all the laws in there, so you got to do a lot more research. It's expensive to work with lawyers, and there's a better way of doing that. So what we're doing at Beehive is we pull in currently hundreds, but soon thousands of laws and bills. And for those who haven't been in middle school civics for a while, a bill is not yet passed and not yet confirmed. A law is like signed and ready to be implemented. We build thousands of laws and bills. For any of these, we know all this stuff about your company and then show this company profile, but we know your revenue, we know your subsidiaries, we know the geographies you're in, we know how many employees, like we know all that stuff. And so we use that, and AI here matches you to a bunch of laws and says that these are the laws that are relevant to your business automatically. And as we pull in new laws from new jurisdictions, AI is going to say, hey, alert, there's a new law in Canada that you didn't know about, or a new bill that came out of California that you might not have known about. And so you finally read some newsletter somewhere, and we're going to tell you about that proactively. Now, it's cool here. We kind of talk about three um, steps to this effort. So there's awareness, there's comprehension, and then there's action. Awareness being, oh gosh, I didn't even hear about this law. Now I've heard about it. Comprehension being, what's actually required? Like, what do I need to do? Who's this for? By when? And then action, like doing the actual work of complying. We focus on the first two segments, and then the actual compliance work is your job or the client's job. What you can do here, so like that AI stuff I just showed you solves awareness. Oh my gosh, here's a new law, here's a new bill, here's like an alert about something that I would not have found otherwise. And then around comprehension, what you might do is call your lawyer, ask some questions. Maybe you'll like go look for the law and try to ask ChatGPT a bunch of stuff. We just embedded all that right in here. So the AI is trained on the text of the law itself. And so if you want to find the actual law for any one of these things, you just click here and you'll find the actual law. And then you can ask these kind of generic questions that we set up here, or you can ask really specific questions like, I don't know, um, uh, does a like what would a fashion brand need to do if they are Australian and have over 1 billion? I don't know. I ask a random things just to see what it'll say. I've never asked this question before. But it works like an AI. So whatever you ask about yourself, the AI worked there, but it's all embedded in here. And this is getting better and better and better. I'm just curious what it comes up with. You really never know. Um, so that's cool. That works today. So that's as that thinks. That's a bit of the what's happening today. The roadmap is basically increasing what we have. So let's see. For Australian fashion. Oh yeah, I picked a New Zealand law. I don't know why I typed Australia. Uh, there's, I guess yeah. So fair answer. There's not a New Zealand standard requirement because you aren't regulated by New Zealand. So there you go. So that's a fair answer. But it does say like here's what you in theory would need to do. So actually, I kind of gave it a tricky question. That was a pretty good answer. So that's what this does today. What's happening next is we're expanding the database of laws. So more countries, more states, more keywords, things like that. And we're building a lot of really cool AI tools in here. So especially around like alerts or newsletters, I think this will be really cool. So right now, newsletters from law firms or ESG Dive or any of those places are kind of generic. There's like, here's an update about 20 laws related to ESG. Like maybe one of them matters to you. What we're going to do is using AI, we'll say, hey, we know which 9 laws and 8 bills matter to you today. Let's use AI to pull relevant news stories specific to those laws and bills and write up, here's what matters to you specifically. Because what matters to two similar companies are going to be different based on their slightly different revenue profiles, their different geographic footprints, their subsidiary setups, and we'll be able to pull all that really, really well. So that's a bit of what's coming. All right. So um, I think that's about it. So here's what BI helps with. Basically, if you need to comply with something like SB 261, which means you have $500 million in revenue, you're US based, you do business in California, you have to write this report this year. We make that really easy. I am happy to answer any questions if y'all have them. I talked for a while. Um, but any questions, thoughts, ideas that folks on here have, I'll just kind of shut up for a minute and give y'all time to type. All right, cool. Just you can raise your hand if you do have a question if you're still typing or something. But if not, then I thank you all very, very much for coming. Next week we're taking off. The first day without a webinar in like first Thursday without a webinar in like 5 months. Um, I'm headed to a bachelor party in Louisville, Kentucky. So gonna be busy. And then in 2 weeks, I believe we're doing a session about transition risks. So just diving really deep into transition risks. And we got some amazing other events coming up. You'll all get an email about all of that. But thank you all very much for joining. I appreciate you. And I look forward to seeing you all soon. Bye bye.